Have you ever wondered what truly happens in a man's mind when the searching stops? When the calls fade, the questions about his day cease, and the energy you once directed his way is quietly reclaimed. You might assume he feels relief, or perhaps that he doesn't notice at all. But psychology suggests something far more profound is taking place beneath the surface. It's not just about noticing an absence, it's about the disruption of a fundamental human pattern, a silent contract that, once broken, forces an uncomfortable and often transformative internal reckoning. This is the moment when a man is confronted not with your absence, but with himself. To understand what he feels, we first have to understand the power of patterns. The human brain is a prediction machine. It thrives on consistency because consistency means safety. It learns that the sun rises in the east, that fire is hot, and that when a certain person is in our lives, they provide a certain kind of feedback. Your attention, your act of looking for him, was not just a series of actions. It was a consistent psychological signal. It told him, on a subconscious level, that he was seen, that he mattered in your world, and that he occupied a certain space. This is a powerful form of validation, whether he consciously acknowledged it or not. When you stop, you don't just withdraw your attention, you break a deeply ingrained cognitive pattern. The first thing he feels isn't sadness or anger, it's confusion, a sense of psychological static. His mind registers a change in the environment, a variable that has suddenly gone missing. It's like walking into a familiar room and sensing something is out of place, even if you can't immediately identify what. This initial feeling is often a quiet, nagging dissonance. He might check his phone, expecting a message that isn't there. He might scroll through social media, subconsciously searching for a sign of your focus. This isn't necessarily a romantic or emotional pursuit on his part, not at first. It is his brain's automatic attempt to restore the pattern, to make the world predictable again. Why do you think this is so unsettling for him? Because a world that is unpredictable is a world that requires more energy to navigate. Your consistent presence, even from a distance, was a known quantity. Its absence introduces an unknown, and the mind instinctively resists unknowns. He is left with a question that he may not even voice aloud. What changed? This question isn't directed at you. It's an internal alarm. His system has detected an error in the code of his social reality, and it's demanding to know why. This is where the experience moves from a simple cognitive blip to something more personal. The initial confusion gives way to a dawning awareness. The silence left by your absence begins to echo with his own thoughts. He starts to replay interactions, searching for the cause the moment the script was altered. Was it something he said? Something he did? This process of questioning is the gateway to the next, more significant stage of his emotional response. He is moving from noticing a change in your behavior to beginning to question its implications for his own sense of self. This is not about you anymore. It is about the reflection of himself that he saw in your eyes, a reflection that has now vanished. And in its place, he is forced to see himself, for himself, perhaps for the first time in a long while. The initial shock is the breaking of the spell, the moment the background music of your attention stops, leaving him alone on stage in the sudden, deafening silence. Once the initial confusion settles, a more primal emotion often takes its place: irritation. This isn't necessarily a loud, overt anger, but a low-level, simmering frustration. Why do you think this is? It's because the ego has been disturbed. The ego is that part of our psyche dedicated to maintaining our sense of identity and self-importance. Your attention, your act of looking, served as a quiet, consistent source of fuel for his ego. It confirmed his significance. It sent a signal that he was worthy of pursuit, that he held a place of importance in your orbit. When you withdraw that attention, the fuel supply is cut off. The ego, starved of its usual validation, begins to sound an alarm. This alarm doesn't sound like sadness, it sounds like indignation. How dare the pattern change without my permission? This feeling of frustration is a psychological defense mechanism. It is far easier for him to feel annoyed at you for changing the rules than it is for him to confront the unsettling question your silence raises. Was my sense of importance dependent on her looking for me? To admit that would be to acknowledge a vulnerability, a reliance on something outside of himself for his sense of worth. And that is a deeply uncomfortable truth for anyone to face. So instead of turning inward, the mind projects outward. The internal discomfort is reframed as an external problem. He might think, she's playing games, or she's being unpredictable. These thoughts are not genuine assessments of your character. They are shields his ego uses to protect itself from the sting of perceived irrelevance. Have you ever noticed how quickly we can invent a narrative about someone else's behavior when it makes us feel insecure? This is precisely what is happening here. He is constructing a story where he is the victim of inconsistency rather than the subject of a necessary internal audit. Beneath this frustration lies a profound loss of control. When you were the one looking for him, he was in a position of passive power. He didn't have to wonder about his place in your life. You consistently showed him where it was. He held the power of response. He could choose to engage or ignore, knowing that the initial energy would always come from you. This creates a predictable and comfortable dynamic. When you stop looking, you reclaim that energy and, with it, the power of initiation. The dynamic is flipped. Suddenly, if he wants to know what you're thinking, he has to ask. If he wants to see you, he has to initiate. The responsibility has been transferred back to him, and this can feel like a significant and unwelcome burden. The sense of control he never even knew he had is suddenly gone, and its absence is glaring. This is where his internal world starts to get truly interesting. The silence you've created becomes a mirror. Without the distraction of your pursuit, he is left alone with his own motivations and insecurities. The frustration is just the surface noise. Underneath it, the real questions begin to form. Why do I feel so unsettled by this? Why did I need her attention so much? He is being forced, perhaps for the first time, to examine his own dependency on external validation. He starts to see the parts of himself he usually ignores: the passivity, the need to be desired, the fear of being forgotten. This isn't a process he consciously chooses. It is a consequence of the new reality you have created. You didn't do this to him. You did it for you. You reclaimed your focus. But in doing so, you inadvertently handed him a mirror, and the reflection he sees in it is not always one he is prepared to acknowledge. After the initial wave of frustration subsides, something else begins to surface, something quieter and far more potent. The mirror you've held up doesn't go away just because he's angry at it. And as he's to stare into it, the anger gives way to a creeping sense of insecurity. This is the stage where the true emotional impact begins. The loss of your attention is no longer just an inconvenient change in his environment. It starts to feel like a judgment on his intrinsic worth. His subconscious mind begins to spin a new, more painful narrative. It's no longer, she's playing games, but rather, why am I no longer worth looking for? This question is the key that unlocks a deeper layer of his psyche. Think about it from a purely psychological standpoint. For as long as you were looking for him, he had external proof of his desirability, his relevance, his importance. Your attention was the data point that confirmed his value. When that data point is removed, he is left with a void, and the human mind abhors a vacuum. It will rush to fill that void with its own conclusions, which are often drawn from its deepest fears. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of being insignificant, the fear of not being enough. These are the hidden anxieties, the parts of himself he usually keeps tucked away from the light. Your silence doesn't create these fears, it simply illuminates them. This is when you might see a subtle shift in his behavior. He might try to restore the old dynamic, not with aggression but with small, tentative gestures. A random "hey" text after weeks of silence. A view on your social media story. A like on a photo from months ago. These are not grand romantic overtures, they are psychological probes. He is testing the system, checking to see if the old connection is still live. He's looking for a sign, any sign, that your attention can be easily won back. Why does he do this? Because it's an attempt to soothe the rising tide of insecurity without having to fully confront it. If he can get you to look for him again with minimal effort, he can dismiss the entire episode. The uncomfortable feeling of irrelevance can be explained away, and his ego can be restored. He can go back to feeling secure in his passive power. But if you to hold your frame to focus on your own life, his perception undergoes another profound transformation. He is forced to confront a new reality. You are not a resource to be managed. You are an independent individual with your own center of gravity. When you were pursuing him, your value was, in his mind, tied to your desire for him. Now your value is defined by your self-containment. Your absence has become more powerful than your presence ever was. He starts to see you not as an admirer, but as a person of substance. A person who has a life that is full enough that she doesn't need to orbit his. This can be both intimidating and incredibly attractive. He is no longer dealing with someone who is trying to win his approval, but with someone who has already given that approval to herself. The dynamic has shifted from a chase to a study. He is no longer the prize. He is now the observer, trying to understand the woman who so quietly and completely reclaimed her power. When his small attempts to regain your attention are met with a D, gentle quiet, a significant internal shift occurs. It's no longer about you not responding. It's about the silence itself becoming a response. This silence isn't aggressive or punishing. It is the sound of a life being lived, a focus being directed elsewhere. And for him, this realization is a turning point. He can no longer rationalize your behavior as a tactic or a temporary mood. He is forced to accept it as a new reality, one in which he is not the central character. The psychological probes have failed. The system he was testing is offline. And so, with nowhere else to turn, his focus is finally, irrevocably forced inward. This is the moment of true introspection, and it is often profoundly uncomfortable. He begins to confront the parts of himself he was able to ignore while your attention served as a convenient distraction. Think of it this way. Your constant looking was like a bright light shining on him, creating a flattering image but also casting a deep shadow behind him. He never had to look at the shadow because he was so focused on the light. Now that you've turned that light away, he is left in the ambient glow of his own reality, and for the first time, he has to turn and face what's been lurking in the dark. This is his shadow self, the collection of traits he finds undesirable or weak. His passivity, his fear of initiating, his deep-seated need to be chosen rather than to choose. Why is this so difficult for him? Because acknowledging these traits means acknowledging that the strength and desirability he felt were not entirely his own. They were co-created, propped up by the scaffolding of your energy. He is forced to ask himself, who am I without someone's validation? This question is terrifying because it threatens the very foundation of his ego. He is mourning the loss of a version of himself he liked, the version that was pursued, that was wanted, that felt effortlessly important. The reality is that this version of him was an illusion, sustained by a dynamic that was never going to be permanent. But the loss feels real nonetheless. It is a quiet, internal grief for a self-image that has dissolved. This is where his journey can diverge down two very different paths. The first path is one of resentment. To avoid the pain of self-reflection, he can solidify the story that you are the problem. He might decide you are arrogant, that you changed, or that you were never genuine in the first place. This narrative allows him to cast himself as the wounded party, preserving his ego and avoiding the difficult work of looking at his own weaknesses. He chooses to remain in the dark, blaming the person who turned off the light instead of learning to see in the new dimness. It is the easier path, the one that requires no change, no growth, and ultimately no true self-awareness. The second path is one of accountability and growth. This path is harder. It requires him to sit with the discomfort and accept the unflattering truths revealed in your absence. It requires him to acknowledge, my sense of self was fragile. I relied on her to feel good about myself, and now I must learn to build that from within. This is not about blaming himself, but about taking responsibility for his own inner world. He starts to see your withdrawal not as a rejection, but as an unintentional gift, an opportunity to become the man who doesn't need to be looked for to know his own value. He begins the arduous process of becoming his own source of validation. The choice he makes at this crossroads will define not only how he feels about you, but how he will feel about himself for a long time to come. Let's explore the path of growth, the more difficult but ultimately more rewarding journey. When a man chooses this path, he moves beyond the initial feelings of confusion, frustration, and insecurity. He begins a process of reevaluation. He is no longer just looking at his own flaws. He starts looking at the entire dynamic between you with a newfound clarity. The emotional fog has lifted, and he can see the structure of your past interactions for what it truly was. He realizes that he was comfortable in a role that required very little of him emotionally. He was the recipient, the one who was sought after, and this passive stance protected him from the risks of vulnerability and rejection. Have you ever considered how much courage it takes to be the one who reaches out first? To be the one who expresses interest, who makes the plan, who puts their feelings on the line? That was the role you were playing. He, on the other hand, was shielded from that emotional exposure. Your looking for him was a buffer that kept him safe. Now, in your absence, he understands the imbalance. He sees that while you were actively investing, he was passively benefiting. This realization isn't about guilt. It's about a dawning respect. He starts to see the strength it took for you to maintain that energy, and he contrasts it with his own inaction. He isn't just seeing his own passivity anymore, he is seeing your courage in stark relief. This newfound respect for you is a critical step. It signals that his ego is no longer in the driver's seat. He has moved from seeing you as a source of his validation to seeing you as a person in your own right, with your own strengths and motivations. This is a profound shift in perspective. He might think back to times he took your efforts for granted, not out of malice, but out of a comfortable ignorance. He remembers the texts he didn't reply to for hours, the plans he was non-committal about, the emotional bids he didn't reciprocate. At the time, these actions felt like demonstrations of his own high value. The prize doesn't have to chase. But now he sees them differently. He sees them as missed opportunities for connection, moments where he failed to meet you halfway. This is where a sense of regret can begin to take root. But it's a different kind of regret from the desperate pining for a lost ego supply. This is a mature, reflective regret. It is the quiet acknowledgement of a missed opportunity for something genuine. He realizes that the dynamic he enjoyed was also the very thing that prevented anything deeper from developing. By never having to risk anything, he also never got to build anything. He was a spectator in a game where you were the only one on the field. This realization can be humbling. It forces him to confront the fact that his safe strategy was also a lonely one. He had the comfort of being wanted, but he missed out on the fulfillment of truly wanting someone and acting on it. This is the point where his feelings about you transform completely. You are no longer the woman who stopped validating him. You have become the catalyst for his own awakening. Your silence taught him more about himself than your words ever could. He starts to understand, on a deep, visceral level, that true strength isn't about being pursued. It's about having a strong enough sense of self that you don't need to be. He is learning the lesson not by being told, but by experiencing the consequences of its absence in himself. He is, in a very real way, beginning to look for himself, and he has you to thank for pointing him in the right direction simply by walking away. As he's down this path of self-awareness, the final stage of his internal transformation begins. He moves from regret and reevaluation to a state of acceptance and, eventually, a quiet sense of admiration. He has fully integrated the lessons of your absence. He no longer sees your withdrawal as a personal slight, but as an act of profound self-respect on your part. And this, in turn, teaches him about the nature of self-respect for himself. He understands that you didn't leave him. You returned to yourself. This distinction is crucial. It absolves him of the need to be a victim and frees you from the role of the antagonist. It was never about him at all. It was about you and your journey. This acceptance brings a sense of peace. The internal turmoil, the confusion, the irritation, the insecurity has been resolved. He no longer feels the nagging urge to check for your presence or to test your attention. Why? Because he has started to cultivate his own. The void that your validation used to fill is now being slowly, carefully, and authentically filled from within. He is learning to be his own source of stability. This is the essence of what ancient Stoic philosophers taught, that our inner peace should never be dependent on things outside of our control, and another person's attention is fundamentally outside of our control. You have inadvertently given him the most powerful lesson in emotional resilience. You taught him through action that the only reliable source of validation is the one that comes from the self. His perception of you is now completely clear. He sees you not through the distorted lens of his own needs, but as you are, a person who knows her own worth. This is often where a deep and genuine admiration is born. It is an attraction that is entirely different from the one he felt before. The previous attraction was based on what you could provide for his ego. This new attraction is based on who you are. He is drawn to your strength, your self-containment, your quiet confidence. He sees these qualities not as a threat to his ego, but as an inspiration for his own growth. You have become a benchmark, not of what he has lost, but of what he could become. Have you ever met someone who seems to operate from a place of complete inner security? They don't need constant reassurance. They don't play games. They are present, and their energy is calm and centered. This is the state he is now striving for. He may even feel a sense of gratitude toward you. It's a strange and paradoxical feeling to be grateful to someone for the pain their absence caused. But he understands that the discomfort was a necessary catalyst for his own evolution. The short-term pain of a bruised ego has led to the long-term gain of a stronger self. He no longer looks at your silence and feels a sting of rejection. He looks at it and feels a sense of understanding. He gets it. He finally understands that the most attractive thing you ever did was to stop needing him to see you. This is the of his emotional journey in response to you, but it is the beginning of a new journey for him. He is now equipped to enter into future relationships, not as a passive recipient of validation, but as an active participant. He will be a man who chooses, who initiates, who invests. He will look for a partner not to complete him, but to complement a self that is already whole. He will be attracted to strength because he is now building his own. You may never know the full extent of the transformation you initiated. You were simply living your life, reclaiming your focus, and honoring your own needs. But in doing so, you set in motion a chain of events that forced a man to stop looking for validation outside himself and start the much more important work of finding it within. The story was never about a man feeling what happens when you stop looking for him. It was about a man finally learning how to look for himself.